focus today on the Java ecosystem. Of course, you can develop microservices in any other language, but today we really focus on Java. So for that reason, please ask more Java-specific questions. Maybe in another session, we will cover also something about Python and everything, but today really focused on Java development. So, so there are a lot of open source projects out there, and my team and me, we developed two really quite good open source projects I would like to show you today. And the first one, I would say we keep this in two different parts this meeting today. One is we talk about setting up in microservice, and we have developed here an Archetype and Maven Archetype for that. And another one is other project. We have some nice templates. I will discuss this later in the second part. So let me just share my screen, and we start now with the Cumulocity microservice Archetype I developed and my team. And I will show you how the project looks like when it's generated. So hopefully everybody knows what an archetype is. Maybe really quick introduction. An archetype is some kind of a template. You can define a project, how a project should look like. You can define dependencies. You can define project structures. You can define a few resources, and also, of course, Java code. And this I have put from a lot of project experience into this project, but it is, of course, a really abstract project. So it has some code already in, but this just helps you to start. And it's also a small portion. I did not put everything in it, what we usually use, but the most things I think it's really common and you should have in your project. So, okay, the first thing you have to do if you want to use this archetype, and this is not yet public, this archetype, for that reason, you have to clone this one. And today I will really do live coding session. So I will check out and I will show you how you can use this archetype. So the first thing what I do, I clone the archetype. And the archetype, of course, must be in your local Maven repository. For that reason, I also built this archetype. And when you have built this archetype, then it's locally deployed to your local Maven repository, and then you can also use that one. And I have also a small explanation here in README, and there's also some prerequisites you have to check. So I try to keep this always up to date with the Cumulocity versions, but I mean, it's not yet to the latest one, but to a quite new one. So let me just, and so this is what I have done already. So I cloned, I installed it, and now you can use the Maven Archetype command to build your project. And what I really like is when I do this command, this will start the archetype in an interactive mode. Interactive means that you have you have to insert your variables for your project. So for example, the microservice name, I will call it test community. Then of course the artifact ID, and you see there's always some proposals. And for that, I think that's fine. So you just have to enter. The package name, here's something you have to be really careful. If you use minus, this is not allowed in the Java package. For that reason, in that case, you have to change this. Cumulocity microservice .dash. I will write it together. So, and now I could hit yes. I would create the microservice. Then you had a microservice created, which is already working, but which is not connected to any tenant. usually, if you start in microservice development, you have already an tenant, maybe for your project, or you have a free tenant. Then you would like to directly connect your microservice to this tenant and start developing it. And this is also possible. For that reason, I say no. I start again. So I say, that's fine. That's also fine. Also good. And yeah, that's now what I can do. I can now here set my tenant Cumulocity URL. And I will do this. I have a tenant where I develop some templates. So I take this one, put this to my console. Again, microservice name, I tag community. Artifact ID is correct. Again, package name, t.microservice tag community. So then in order to connect my microservice, I need also Bootstrap credentials. And I just take my credentials from my tenant. So I just go to developer tools and copy this from some request. This one. So I have really to take here the base64 one. This. And now I say yes. Sorry. Okay, something went wrong, which is not good. Invalid in package, unable to current project is not package type. That's crazy. I don't know why it's not working today. That's strange. That's typical. Okay, unable. This was one of my guys at the same error. Let me just check. Current project is not of package type POM. Let me try again. Let me just try again. I will just do this in that type. Microservice name, dash community. I will in the type this. And yes. Still not working. Let me just. No, it's not about the base64. Let me just try another branch for my for requests. Now, one moment. Code. Let's just community patch. Oh, sorry, this is the wrong one. This one. Just community patch now, not in for all branches. Okay, active. Maybe this one. Okay. Check out. Get the feature. Oh, sorry. Dev and friends. Okay, let me just take again this one. And so again. Sorry, I was also not in the right folder. Maybe this was a problem. So again, sorry for that. Yeah, it was that problem. Yeah, you have to be really careful. I mean, I wanted to generate my project in the Cumulocity microservice archetype, and this is of course a problem. So let me just tech community. So again, that's fine, that's fine. So let me just check if it's building now. Ah, great. So anyway, let me just create a new one. So now tech community, Cumulocity microservice .tech community. No. So that's a bit of hassle why I have to type now everything again, but there's a reason why I wanted to have this as optional, that you can also just build without having this directly connection to your tenant. So tech minus community. Yes, base URL again. So whoop. That's one. And base 464 credentials, this one. Artifact ID is correct. Package name, cumulocity.microservice.tech community. And yes. Okay, now it went good, and it's now also deployed. So at first the project is there, and I can go to this. You can see that Cumulocity microservice tech minus community. So there's a project. This project I can also import in my IDE. So import existing Maven project, browse, and this one, and finish. And I also added already the tenant ID. I will show you what the Maven archetype did. Moment, must be finished build. It created an application dev properties with also the right credentials. And what I mean here with dev is that you really can start your microservice locally. That's usually what you want. So when you start developing a microservice, you would like directly to develop and start your application with your tenant. So when I look at my microservices at my tenant, I will also have now the test community minus dev. And there's also a reason why I added here an additional component on it. The name of my microservice is test minus community. But if I would like to have a parallel development, for example, I would like to upload the microservice to this one. I will show you later. I can do this in parallel. So I can directly connect now with my application. So what I can now do is really just start and say run as Spring Boot application. So it's already started, the microservice, connected to my tenant, to my test community dev representation. And what you have seen is that, one moment, that this is not yet built as a Docker container. For that reason, and this is also good practice, what we do, there is in the POM XML an additional switch. So at the moment is skipping the Docker container, but you can also set this to false. And for that, I have to start here my Ubuntu because I have only the Docker here. I don't have Docker desktop anymore. So cd Cumulocity, microservice, tech, community. And now I say Maven clean install. Before I have to stop, of course, my running local instance. So now I can build again my microservice. Takes a little bit. Starting. And with this run now, also a Docker container is built by the plugin we provide, the Cumulocity microservice plugin. It creates this Docker container, which I can later upload to my tenant. I will also show you in a sec when it's finished. And as long as this builds, let me also share some insights about the project, which is generated by the Archetype. So at first, what we have already seen, we use also Spring profiles. So this is also quite good practice to have 3 profiles. This is dev, prod, and test. And as you can see, prod and test does not have these informations because this is actually usually only used really with the Docker container that you upload the microservice, and this is automatically set when you deploy your microservice then from. So it's run. It will run hosted on the Cumulocity, and you don't have to configure this stuff here. And yeah, this is just a little bit play stuff. So we have also this banner.txt, which has quite nice version informations. For example, I also print here the SDK version, the microservice SDK version, and of course, the microservice version is also printed out. So something else is also important. You have, of course, the Cumulocity JSON, where you define your required roles. And you have already an logback configuration file where you can define what log levels you want to use and which ones. I have here a few. If you develop a microservice which has REST endpoints, which is quite often, then you have also some good things. For example, HTTP client wire is also a good log to have a log level here if you really would like to see the traffic between your client and the server. It's for debugging reasons sometimes really well work good to have. But this is, of course, you can change. It's really some kind of template you can use, but of course you can remove these things. And again, we also have here these different profiles, dev, test, prod. It's always good to have different log file configurations for those profiles. To the code, this is really something you probably will change when you use the Archetype, but it also helps you to see a little bit a good structure. So usually, of course, we have the application. This you will probably not change, but usually you have some REST endpoints. So you have these controller package and the controller is using an service. So you should not put too much business logic in the controllers. You should more put the logic in your services. And yeah, for that reason, I provide this structure here. It even does something, this microservice, and it just gives you a list of devices back. I will show you in a minute. So now it should be finished. Yeah, on my machine I get some error with my Docker, but it's successfully built. I checked this already, and now I can also add this microservice here. Let me just go to my tech community microservice. This is a built Docker container. And I also would like to subscribe. And you will see this upload will not have the -dev in the name, in the key, and in the path, in order to have a parallel development, so that I can have a dev environment where I can upload the microservice, but also I can have this microservice representation to connect my local instance to. So I think this is what I often did to check if my local stuff is working. But in the end, probably you would like to have a version really or running hosted on your environment. So this takes a while. Yes, something else. So yeah, let me just show you what this really easy microservice does. I can of course also run again and show you. So this is my tech community microservice. When I run this locally, of course, I can just say end 8080 and check if this is working. You see it's up. And this example has also a REST endpoint. It's hello devices and API. So you can also change this to API and say hello devices. Yes, then of course I also have to insert here my credentials. Important to know, always use the tenant before. Okay. And now my microservice also returns this example, this list of devices. And of course, this one I can also now call directly on my microservice. So when I use the right path, and this is tech community, I already have. Again. So I just go, yeah, well, I have to enter it again. Just need a tenant ID. .com. So yeah, oh, Microsoft not available. Let me just check. Maybe I did not. Maybe it's not yet up and running. Ecosystem microservices. Test community. Yeah, it's not yet started. I mean, this takes always a while when the container started. But you can see it's already starting. Exceptions. Yeah, it was also used, said here also the versions you can see. Yeah, but that's it for the first part. So I mean, we can wait until this is online, but it will work. I have done this several times. So yeah, that's from the first part. I mean, Stefan, I think we can now maybe open an Q&A for this archetype.
Okay, I just opened the mics. If you have some questions about the archetype, go on and fire. You can also use the chat, of course, if you don't want to speak up.
Hello. So do I understand correctly that the archetype would automatically create this dev application when it's created?
Yeah, correct. So this archetype it creates this project. And you have some, as you can see, I have typed in something, and this is, of course, these are variables in the project, and this will be set. So the package name, the microservice name. I mean, this is also set in the POM XML. We have here a lot of things which are also configured then. For example, the microservice name. All these things are configured by the archetype. And what you get out is it's really a quick microservice which is directly working locally, and also when you upload these microservice to the tenant. And usually when you start without this archetype, of course, you will use another archetype to build a normal Spring application, and then you will add all the things you need. You know the microservice dependency. You have to add these microservice package Maven plugin. You have to, of course, build up these something like that to have a good differentiation between dev, prod, and test. And or you have to write this app. I mean, and you also have to bootstrap your microservice when you want to run locally against a tenant. You need some REST endpoints to call. So creating the microservice of the Cumulocity side, and fetch with the bootstrap credentials, the microservice credentials, which are added automatically with the archetype to this one. And so these are really the microservice credentials which are added here during the generation process. So the archetype has also an script which does this. I mean, it's open source. You can have a look. Maybe we can also have a look what this script does. So.
And we will go through the source code, I suppose, in a bit, right?
I mean, the source code which is generated is not much. It's really just these things. Or what do you mean with a? What do you mean?
I was just wondering if it's coming if going to the source code would be something on the agenda, or it's just very basic example.
You mean it's really a basic example. So it has really the minimum what you need to run in microservice.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And let me just check. I can't remember. Resources. No. Archetype. It's a long time ago when I did this. To check. No, it must be here. Meta-int. Yes, and there's a Groovy script. And this Groovy script does the registration of the microservice. So as you can see, it's a little bit, the rules are fixed. I mean, in the future, I could read also the right rules from the project, because this script is run after the project is generated. And what I do at first is create application on Cumulocity tenant. Then step 2 is subscribing to application for tenant and acquire microservice credentials, which are stored in the property file. And that's it, what the script does. And this is actually the only magic what the archetype is doing. And of course, the structure is kept in the archetype and also the resource files. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, maybe as we have a lot of beginners in the call, to summarize it a little bit more, if you start with microservice development for Cumulocity IoT, there's a lot of pitfalls. There's, for example, a Hello World microservices available in the documentation, but most likely all the things Alex just mentioned, like the registration, the bootstrap credentials, how to find the right structure for the microservice, how to write in controller, REST controller, how to do the plugin dependencies in the POM file. These are all pitfalls if you first time develop the microservices, and this archetype really helps you to avoid these pitfalls.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I developed the first microservice were really sometimes difficult to develop, and we fall in this trap sometimes. And this archetype trying to prevent this. So, I mean, as you can see, you can directly use this archetype and run. It's working always, and on that you can really fast develop then your features you want to develop, and you don't have to cope with this typical microservice problems we had in the beginning. So it's a good template, and I really would recommend to use this if you start developing a microservice.
The workaround I used in the past is actually I used a well-structured microservice I developed in the past and copied the whole structure and removed all the parts of which is actually the business logic and all this thing, and then implemented the business logic for the new microservice. But this is the ugly way how to do it, and the archetype way, to be honest, is a nice way to do that. Say.
Yeah, exactly. And for that reason, maybe then I can, if there are no questions to the archetype, this is a good bridge to our templates, because for that reason templates were generated of this reason.
There's one question from Cyril in the chat. This is not really related to the archetype, but somehow maybe you know that. Is the latest Maven microservice plugin Java 11 Plus compatible, or do we still need to write our own Docker file to avoid the 200 megabytes microservice? Do you know that?
That's a good question, but yes. So as you can see, because it's Java install 11, I can remember this border with this size, but I did not experience this anymore. But I'm not quite sure, actually.
It's actually a question for the microservice plugin provided from the Cumulocity team, because in the past, I think, Cyril, you asked a question because in the past, the microservice Docker containers was pretty big. And they did some implementation improvements to reduce the size of the containers generated, like Alex just showed a couple of minutes ago, which is much smaller than like 600 or 500 megabyte containers in the past.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you can also configure actually the Cumulocity version. But there's something what I think I can improve. What you can't is configuring the Spring Boot version. So for that reason, I need probably a little bit improvement of the archetype. But what you can do, and you have seen when I was in the interaction mode, you could also change the Cumulocity version. So at the moment, the default I think is 10.13. Now, of course, we have 10.14. You can also, of course, then type in 10.14. Then it will be used if it's available in the Maven repository. That's also possible. But again, Spring Boot version is also something we should maybe make configurable. It's currently is fixed.
Yeah, actually, on the article I wrote regarding the support for Java 11, there is an example Docker file that you could reuse in your archetype to optimize your microservice size when you generate.
That's a good point. Can you maybe forward?
Yeah, I put the link in the chat.
Great, thanks.
So you just need to copy and paste the Docker file. It's generic. You should be able to reuse it as is in your project.
Great, perfect. Thanks. All right, then. Okay, maybe then we can move to the next one. And this is again an open source project, Cumulocity microservice templates, and these are. So we tried to, and this project is much older than the archetype, and I did exactly what Stefan did. I used that as my template. I copied the projects from here and built up here new microservices and removed the stuff what I didn't need. But anyway, what we did here in this open source project is that we tackle a few typical common issues we have during our projects, or we saw that this probably will be used in different projects as well. And so we added here different submodules. And each submodule here covers a different topic, and it's actually also a full running microservice. So we have here, for example, agent, basic AHA cache. We have also some metrics, multi-scheduler, real-time, and secret. And in the project, we also have to describe what's inside in this submodule. So the basic, this is really some kind of template, again, a bit more than what the Archetype is producing. It has also some basics. As you can see, we have here more controllers, and there's also an scheduler implemented. This is something we really often need. And I mean, I can also show you this as code, because this is something the most microservices have an time scheduler or a scheduled job, which does something. For example, if you migrate some data from one system to Cumulocity, you will not have to, you don't usually trigger this via a REST endpoint. You want to integrate this periodically, for example. And for that reason, and this is when you start with microservices, not easy to implement. Let me just, device service, let me just, yes. And this is the magic behind is that, of course, you can use the scheduled function of Spring, which is pretty nice and you can use. But in this thread, you don't have an scope of a tenant. And for that reason, you need the subscription device, microservice subscription service, exactly. And then you can define here run for each tenant or run for a specific tenant if you like. And in that you are in the right scope, and then you can use the SDK with the inventory API or something else. This is just an example. So, and this is covered in these examples. And you can have a look at it, how it's working. But more important is that you know what is covered in these different submodules. But this is actually also written here, and it's also written how to run this locally. And here you can see that you have to do the bootstrapping by yourself. It's not as convenient as the Archetype does. But anyway, it helps you. I mean, this probably you will not run, but you will have a look and get an idea how this can be implemented. So we had the basic, the agent. The agent is also a good point. But I have to be a little bit careful here. So usually an agent is not a microservice, or you have maybe a server-side agent. This is, of course, a microservice. And these agents, you know, probably regarding device management, this agent has a representation and has some configuration possibilities, updates, and all these things. And some features of this device management, it's also nice to have for a microservice. And I think of, for example, configuration. There's also the agent can have a configuration possibility. Usually the agent is taking the log file, the configuration files of the device, and put this to the Cumulocity device management, and you can see this as plain text, or you can even use this as files and so on, and you can manage this configuration in Cumulocity. Similar things you could even do with microservices. And for configuration, I would say it makes sense. But, and this is what we have done, but you have to be a little bit careful. You can also create, for example, measurements for your microservice. Think of memory consumption and I don't know, maybe disk space and all the things you can do, but you have to be a little bit careful. That's possible. And in some cases, it makes sense if you have no other possibilities, but these are really things which should be handled by Kubernetes and by other for example, Prometheus endpoints you use to show this in order not to put too much pressure on the platform and to monitor such things. So again, depends really on the use case, about the environment you have. You can use that. It's totally fine, but keep always in mind not to put too much pressure on the platform. I mean, this is a production system in the future. And of course, the telemetry data of the device are much more important than maybe the telemetry data of your microservice. And this should be handled and monitored in a different way. But again, there are some features you can use. And this part, the agent part, shows you how you can define your microservice as an agent and use the device management capabilities. Yeah, I have here, for example, an example that you can have configurations on your microservice. This is I like because the microservice depends. I mean, you can also use tenant options, makes also sense, but in some cases, tenant options are not good enough. And for that reason, this is a good example to use this agent representation of the microservice. So the next one, this is really probably not really common, but in some cases you need a cache in your microservice. I had one project where such capability was needed, and I used EH cache, which is actually also from Software Cache from the Terracotta team. And there's a really nice cache abstraction in Spring, which is really nice to use. If you need a cache, this is really nice to use. And there's an example where I use a cache abstraction and use really the EH cache as implementation. There are different caches as well you can use, but I choose EH cache because it's also from Software AG. So then we have the metrics. This was Kai did provide this. So I can't really tell much about this, but if you need Prometheus and Grafana metrics, this is what I said before, then there is a good example how to provide this on your microservice. Also really, really nice. And yeah, and the multi-scheduler is also something you have to keep in mind when you have a multi-tenant microservice. So you have to be aware there are two different possibilities. You can have a single microservice or multi-tenant microservice. And when you have a multi-tenant microservice and you do something in this form I showed you before, when we have this scheduled job, so run for each tenant, it's important to know when I'm here inside. This is just one thread and it goes through each tenant step by step. And this can be really a problem. Can you imagine you have one tenant which has some problems here and blocks all other tenants, which is not really nice. And for that reason, I developed here a tenant microservice which creates here for each tenant and thread, and really is not blocking one tenant or to another tenant. So I think this is really also a really good example. And if you have a multi-tenant microservice, you should always keep in mind when you handle different tenants that you separate these in different threads in order not to block one tenant. When one tenant is blocked, that all others not working anymore. So this is, I think, a really important one. Realtime, I think Christian did that. Yeah, this is probably good examples how to use our Realtime API. Yes, have a look. I mean, you have to be a little bit careful when you do that with the SDK. Yeah, have a look. I can't really tell you much here, but this is something you usually need when you want to notify it if something has changed on your managed object, measurement, or event. So you have to subscribe to the Realtime channel and get the changes. And secret is also a really often used feature when your microservice, for example, is connecting to another system which has credentials, and you have to store these credentials or maybe a shared key somewhere, and you want to encrypt this. you usually use tenant options, and with the tenant options you have to add the secret to the name, and automatically Cumulocity is encrypting that and decrypting that depending on if you read or write. And this is also an example how to use tenant options for these configurations. This is probably not much to see, but you just have to know how to use that. Yeah, that's it about the templates, what we cover at the moment here. Yeah, so we can again start the questions Q&A session.
Are there any questions? We had some discussion in the chat about distributed caching. I think Cyril asked about child device operation management.
Let me just, I did not have a look at the chat. Yeah, there's a discussion. Yeah, of course, caching is of course a really big topic, and this is really an easy example. And it's not in distributed cache in that case, of course. But I just used, I mean, what I really liked about this is that there's a cache abstraction in Spring Boot, and maybe you can also use with this abstraction also distributed cache system. But you just have to change the implementation. It's a little bit like the logging framework. Then you use SLF4J. You use that, but you can underneath you can change the implementation, and this is really nice about Spring cache abstraction. And maybe this is also possible with a distributed cache, but I'm not so deep into this topic, so I can't really tell you. Yeah, for the project I used this cache was really just storing internal IDs for some managed objects.
This is also very often used, especially not querying the identity API too much if the identity API is not changing very often. That you store them in the cache and then have a high cache ratio hit rate, not querying all the time the Cumulocity platform. I do have a question in regards of the multi-scheduler, because you said you have their threading. Is this also an example how you can actually do all the asynchronous implementation using completable futures and so on? Or is this something different?
No, something different. What I did in the multi-scheduler, what I do is now I create for each tenant a different job.
Okay, I see.
And this job is running in a different thread. It was actually with Spring it was quite easy to do, but I had to change these I had to do some data sync task scheduler config. Yeah, it was nothing with future, so it runs just in another thread. I don't, yeah. I mean, it's of course some kind of async, but in my use case, I did not need it. It was really isolated then working. If the thread was finished, I did everything in this thread and did not communicate it back to a central system where I check if everything is done. For example, if you had something like that, of course, then you need some kind of future or something.
Yeah.
But I mean, when I started, I don't know why, but I assumed that would be handled in different threads. For that reason, I was wondering when then I had some problems, and I have seen that always the same thread was printed out. But I have here an example, and you can see then there's always a different task scheduler here, which is then running in parallel.
Yeah.
Yes, and maybe also again, maybe something to the EHA cache. What I implemented here as well is that I listen to the channel that I did what I did is that when a managed object changed, I removed this from my cache and it was loaded again. And with the abstractions, also nice, you can configure a lot. For example, how long these things stay in the cache. So you could say every 10 minutes the element gets removed to get always a new one. And the abstraction gives you the possibility to configure a lot. But you have to check here the Spring Cache abstraction. And you can also define which exactly you want to, what you want to cache. So yeah, it's pretty good. Good to know. But actually, I haven't used it again. But what I have seen a lot of own caches built with hash with hash tables and all the things. I think this is a better approach to use instead of using really own developed caches. Yeah.
Are there any other questions or anything you wanted to share? Three, two, one. So thank you very much, Alex. I think it was really helpful, at least for me, to get an overview about the archetype and the microservice templates. This meeting is recorded, so afterwards I will share it with you, all the participants and everyone who could not attend, so you can actually view the recording afterwards. Thank you very much for the participation, and hopefully we see in one of the next events. Have a nice day, guys. See you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.